I may have lied when I said I didn't want to do a Gaiomon deck. Well, partially. While Gaiomon is treated as a Greymon named Digimon, today's build takes a look back at older Greymon cards and whether one elevates it to new levels. And spoiler, it might actually. As always, if you enjoy these types of videos, do consider liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and hitting that notification bell for more future content. With Cyber Eden's official release on Friday, players have been given new energy for several decks and archetypes. And while players may be exploring new builds of Greymon with Wargreymon and Gaiomon, the only card I'm needing from this up for Greymon decks is Yuuko Kamishiro. Yuuko Kamishiro has some similarities to another tamer, previously released in the form of Yuuko. Both have abilities that grant your Greymon some form of protection, albeit with Yuya you need to digivolve into the same level Digimon, versus with Yuuko Kamishiro, attack target simply needs to change. But because security bombs have been becoming less and less used, this is where Yuuko Kamishiro might offer something that Greymon decks can finally use to return to the competitive scene. The only downside is setting up all the pieces. With Yuuko Kamishiro, this tamer gains you a memory if your opponent has a Digimon in play. In addition, when attack targets change on all turns, by suspending this tamer, your opponent's Digimon effects don't affect one of your Digimon with Greymon in its name or the CS trait, and it gets plus 3000 DP. Meaning if you raid into something, you'll be immune for the remainder of the turn. In some ways, this is an upgrade of progress because your stack maintains this, which is what makes a lot of Greymon Digimon get value from it. The downside is, attack targets must change for this to work. And while you could supplement this deck with the newest Wargreymon and Gaiomon cards, I took this particular deck profile a completely different direction because of older cards and very interesting combos. To that end, Wargreymon is great for playing any of your black or red tamers, assuming you have one or less in play. Its inheritable security attack +1 also makes your plays extremely aggressive, and furthermore, this Digimon has raid. Gaiomon interestingly is one of the first Greymon Digimon that can forcibly unsuspend your opponent's Digimon and therefore give itself a raid target. But one key thing here is that its effect to gain DP and piercing is what's critical for Greymon decks moving forward, and here's why. In looking back at older cards, I won't deny that BT12 Wargreymon was one of the OG Wargreymon cards that gave a lot of value during its format. Because of BT12 Taikamiya, you were able to not only raid over a target and then attack over another, but because you digivolved into it that turn, you would also reboot and unsuspend for a double blocker the next turn. But besides Gaiomon and BT12 Wargreymon, what is another level 6 Digimon that could take the slot? The answer is BT21 Wargreymon. Though an uncommon, this Digimon can have its play cost reduced by 2 for each of your opponent's Digimon. It has Rush, Raid, and Blocker. But it also has an all-turns effect, in which when any of your opponent's Digimon are deleted, this Digimon may unsuspend. Which is why, when it comes to combos, there are honestly a lot of things you can do. But ultimately, players may frown on this particular build because of its tendency to sit in the raise and promote up for the kill in one turn. Like always, you'll hatch Koromon and digivolve into Agumon, but for the sake of keeping your opponent on less memory, this is where you'll either play out your tamers early so they can't capitalize on more memory later, or you'll pass over 3 for the search, or you'll simply pass over 2 memory and digivolve into level 4, or play a training. While playing a tamer is a lot of memory, if your opponent can't effectively utilize 7 memory before putting you to 3, you ultimately gain some value. And with Memory Fixer Taikamiya in particular, this means that on turn 2 you could be playing Yuuko Kamishiro and choking your opponent at 1 memory. Now the fun part, climbing up to the level 6. On turn 3 there are a lot of things that could be happening. Either your opponent's chip damaged you and giving you trainings to play with. But regardless if they have an unsuspended Digimon in play, you'll go to 4 memory with Taikamiya and Yuuko Kamishiro and now the fun begins. With BT14 Agumon, because of the presence of Taikamiya, you can evo into Greymon for free and then draw for the Digivolve. But what if you had that one of Greymon X, or a training available? This means you can digivolve into metalgreymon for a cost of 1, and then digivolve into your BT12 Wargreymon for a cost of 3, setting you to exactly 0 memory. Because of that security attack +1 on Greymon, and the security attack +1 on Taikamiya, this Wargreymon can raid, gain plus 3000 DP, and be unaffected by Digimon effects thanks to Yuuko Kamishiro. Because your opponent has an unsuspended Digimon, this is where redirecting attacks helps and lets you pierce with the metalgreymon for 3 checks and a big beefy body. Now you attack again for 3 more checks, and then it's simply Liberator Omnimon for game. But what if you didn't have Taikamiya or the security attack +1 Greymon? The funny thing about this deck is that even putting your opponent to 0 means they have to out the stack. And because BT12 Wargreymon reboots, this makes your Omnimon X into a blocker now as well. Now you might be thinking, but what if my stack is deleted the following turn? Now what? There's a reason why certain cards have a better time in this deck now, especially if it's hitting the security the turn before you promote out a new Agumon. Because with Tai and Yuuko putting you to 4 memory total, Dragon of Courage now can utilize all these components that were under your last stack, whether Wargreymon was bounced or deleted. Which means assuming you have another Wargreymon in hand, you can raid and do the whole combo again. With the way I crafted and tested this deck, it is extremely glass cannon. But on the bright side, because of how fast the games can go, this is ultimately a cheeky deck that can take some games by turn 3. Though unfortunately with the current meta, Metalgreymon can also do so, if not faster, by a single turn. Generally with the deck profile, you'll see considerable shifts in some areas, but I'll explain why momentarily. For level 2s, the ultimate egg is still of course BT5 Koromon. When your Greymon or Omnimon named Digimon attack, this gives you a card draw. And remember folks, card draw always helps you with finding your combo pieces, and combined with some of the protection effects now, you can keep stacks on board and build a secondary. Level 3s, I keep everything strictly Agumon. True, you could run Agumon X for the protection and extra searches, but for the time being, this particular variant was looking at a purist perspective and utilizing the Yuukos on my turn for protection. Which means for Agumons, of course I'm going with the classic BT14 Agumon for the free Evo in the presence of Tai Kamiya. I'm also going with the BT12 for its widest search of 4 cards for a Greymon or Omnimon named Digimon, and a Tamer with Tai Kamiya in its name. But I'm also returning to some of the roots with BT5 Agumon, who adds a Digimon with Greymon and a Digimon with Omnimon in its name. And the last Agumon comes from BT21, which returns a Dragonkin trait Digimon or a Reptile trait Digimon back to hand. Again, you might be wondering why I'm just running Agumons, but there's actually a really funny crackback combo you can do. With Greymons, the only X-Antibody Greymon I'm running is the limited copy of Greymon X from BT11. Not for the protection, but for the cheap Digivolution up. Because of its ability, going into any dual-colored level 5 Greymon only costs 1 memory. With trainings and Yuuko Kamishiro, you can climb up to level 6 off just 2 memory. 3 if the level 5 Digimon is non-dual colored. But the rest of the Greymons fulfill 3 purposes. Extra DP buffs and a memory gain, playing out Tai Kamiya if you don't have one in play, or another security attack +1. Simple and sweet, and with certain option cards, this is why I do not run Greymon X from BT9. For the level 5s, you'll notice that I am not on any of the new metalgreymons from EX9, and for one simple reason. I need Piercing. Piercing is the cornerstone inheritable I'll need when playing this deck, and because there are 2 metalgreymons that meet this criteria, this is all I need. Additionally, previously when you raided with the BT12 metalgreymon, sometimes you ran into the issue of dying into a Digimon or Blast Evoing. But with Yuuko in play, this doesn't matter as much anymore. You'll likely survive and then just get to play more Tamers for more shenanigans in later turns. And while you could run Altruist mode for the additional DP buffs or the new EX9 metalgreymon, ultimately you really need Piercing to really maximize your damage. Though if you do choose to adjust your top end, I would say drop the Piercing inheritables for the EX9 metalgreymon and the new Rise Greymon. Which is why you could run the old BT14 Wargreymons if you choose to, but its Digivolution cost is the only thing holding it back, and there's no unsuspend. The bright side, it can bring you to a 4 security breaker on a single swing, with the inheritables from Security Attack +1 Greymon, metalgreymon, and itself. But its Warp Digivolution would lose those inheritables and only be a 2 security breaker at most. Ultimately, this is where I landed on the BT12 Wargreymon and BT21 Wargreymon because of their abilities to restand. And with BT21 being a blocker, it does have some benefits. If you did happen to replace all your level 5s of the inheritable, this is where you could go back to the new Gaiomon, it's just the Digivolution cost might be a little heftier. For endgame finishers, Omnimon X is the best option for the deck because it can still attack even if suspended, or it's unable to suspend. Ultimately, that means that with a triple breaker with Wargreymon going twice, Omnimon X can just finish the game. But if you are on a budget, Blitz Omnimon always works. Option-wise, it's consistency cards with the offense training, and the delay for a reduction of 2 memory later, which can help in the level 5 and 6 category. But the big hilarious option card here is the Dragon of Courage, in that promoting up a new Agumon means that if Greymon and metalgreymon are in the trash, you can warp Digivolve into a Wargreymon in hand and combo off with Yuuko and Tai together. Honestly, it's not something I expected to work as well, but the negation of Digimon effects really helps. And finally for Tamers, you have Tai Kamiya for memory fixing, and the extra security check if your Digimon has 4 or more Digivolution sources. And the best Tamer for the deck being Yuuko Kamishiro. But after going through this deck profile, what are some of its major pitfalls? There are 2 things in which that if your opponent can game you on board, that's just it. You're done. There's no security bombs in this variant of the deck, and ultimately even though Gaiomon can unsuspend Digimon and raid into them, what gives the most value in this particular deck is that both Wargreymons unsuspend through some effect, which means, combined with the piercing and multiple security attack +1 triggers, you can crack back hard. But without the presence of a body, you can't utilize Yuuko Kamishiro, and you can't unsuspend. Though BT21 Wargreymon's unsuspend is conditional on Digimon deletion, so if you ever do come up against this deck, the biggest way to avoid the OTK is just passing turn. Other avenues that you can avoid are of course, the typical elements of battle protection, or even armor purge. But in looking at Eggman events page, these decks aren't doing too hot either. By the way, if you haven't checked out the Eggman's website, you can find a record of Digimon events that have happened, along with the decks that have placed with the card-by-card deck profiles. Link in the description if you haven't checked it out. That being said, while this is a deck profile focused heavily on OTK, I am looking into a black-based variant that cheats more with the memory system and taunts your opponent to attack. Remember, Yuuko Kamishiro's effect is all turns, meaning if a redirect occurs via block, you can protect your stack through your opponent's turn as well. Overall, what are your thoughts in implementing some of these ideas for Greymon decks moving forward? As I mentioned, this list isn't perfect, and at the same time, Greymon decks aren't exactly the cream of the crop like they used to be. But with EX10 quickly approaching, maybe an anti-hero variant will be what brings it up a notch. This DIGI-PANDA? Logging out.